whispers from the Evershade lay forgotten in a dark corner of the world, swallowed by time and choked by the skeletal remains of overgrown trees. Once a bustling mining town, it had become infamous after the Night of Whispers in the 1900s, when every man, woman, and child vanished without a trace. Rumors spread like wildfire, speaking of ghostly figures seen among the ruins and an unholy presence that had seeped into the earth itself. Those brave or foolish enough to venture near claimed to hear disembodied voices whispering secrets that sent shivers down their spines, as if the town were alive, watching them. The locals of the nearby village spoke of it only in hushed tones, warning travelers to stay away. They spoke of a miner named Jacob Merriweather who had ventured into Evershade long after its abandonment, driven by greed and curiosity. When he returned, his eyes were hollow, his voice nothing but a fractured whisper, incoherent and maddening. He spent his last days carving strange symbols into the walls of his cabin, muttering something about hollow ones before vanishing into the night. His cabin was later found empty, the symbols glowing faintly in the dark, as if alive. The town, they said, had been cursed since the 1900s. Dr. Lenora Graves adjusted her scarf against the biting wind as she stepped out of the jeep, her boots crunching on the frostbitten earth. Behind her, Bacchus Ollie Sullivan unloaded their gear, grumbling under his breath. "We shouldn't be here, Len. This place feels wrong," he muttered, eyeing the ruins warily. "Wrong doesn't scare me," Lenora replied sharply, her eyes scanning town. "Unanswered questions do." Ivy Molina, their wiry photographer, stepped out next, camera in hand. "This is incredible," she whispered, snapping shots of the decaying buildings. "The textures, the atmosphere. It gives me chills." Sully scoffed, rolling his eye. "Yeah, that's just the ghosts trying to warn us to leave." Ellie Pratt, the financier behind their expedition, was the last to exit the vehicle. He adjusted his pristine gloves, his sharp suit stark against the bleak landscape. "Let's move quickly," he said. "The artifact won't find itself." That evening, the group set up camp in the abandoned saloon, its walls etched with jagged, claw-like marks that made Sally's stomach churn. The air inside was thick with mildew, and there's a faint metallic scent, like rusted iron. The floorboards groaned under their weight, and every creak seemed deliberate, echoing ominously through the cavernous room. The claw marks weren't random. They spiraled in jagged patterns, leading the eye to the ceiling where a chandelier hung crooked, its crystals coated in a fine layer of dust. From time to time, faint whispers seemed to weave through the silence, as though the building itself were murmuring secrets long forgotten. As night fell, the silence deepened, pressing down on them like a physical weight. The faint creaks of the building felt deliberate, as though the town itself was watching, waiting. Ivy was the first to hear it a whisper, so faint it could have been the wind, but it seemed to say her name. "Did you hear that?" she asked, lowering her camera. Lenora looked up from her maps. "Hear what?" "Someone said my name," Ivy whispered, her voice trembling. "It sounded like my mum." Sully shot her a skeptical look. "Your mum's been dead for years," he said, his voice tight. "Don't start this." Before Ivy could respond, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Sully immediately grabbed a flashlight and started toward the staircase, Lenora close behind. They found nothing but overturned furniture and a shattered mirror. But in the dust on the floor, there's a fresh set of footprints leading to nowhere. The next morning, Ivy was visibly shaken, but Ellie's determination pushed them forward. They located the mine entrance, an ominous black maw that seemed to exhale cold air. The whispers grew louder as they descended, a soft chorus of unintelligible voices echoing off the damp walls. "It's just the wind," Lenora muttered, more to herself than to the other. But Sully, leading the group, suddenly froze. "I hear, myself," he murmured, his voice quivering. "Calling for help." "Keep moving," Eli snapped, his impatience sharp. The mine's descent felt like entering another world. The air grew colder with each step, and the light from their headlamps barely made a dent to the thick darkness. The tunnel walls were jagged and glistened with the dampness that smelled faintly of decay. Strange etchings marred the rock figures, twisted and writhing in what looked like agony. Sully ran his hand across one, recoiling when he felt its warmth. "It's warm," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The whispers intensified, growing more distinct, as if the voices were closing in on them. Some sounded like children crying, others like prayers twisted into wails. At the heart of the cavern, they found it. The artifact's a grotesque, pulsating heart encased in stone. It emitted a faint, sickly glow, casting eerie shadows that flickered as though alive. The air around it was thick, almost gelatinous, and each breath felt like inhaling molasses. The whispers crescendoed into screams, digging into their minds like needles. "It's alive," Ivy breathed, stepping closer with her camera. The moment she snapped a photo, the artifact's glow flared, and the shadows on the walls began to move. They stretched, twisting into vaguely humanoid shapes with hollow eyes. Ivy screamed as one of the shadows lunged at her, enveloping her. Her body dissolved into the darkness, her voice joining the chorus, pleading for help until she was gone. "We has to go," Sully shouted, yanking Lenora's arm so hard it almost threw her off balance. But Ellie stood frozen, his eyes locked on the artifact, pale with a mixture of awe and dread. The cavern felt alive, the walls pressing in on them with a palpable weight. "This is it," Ellie murmured, his voice trembling. "This is what I've been searching for all these years." "Ellie, no." Lenora screamed, but her words were lost in the growing hum of the stone. It was a low, throbbing pulse, as though the very air itself were calling him closer. His fingers hovered over the surface, trembling with a mix of reverence and dread before finally touching it. The moment his skin met the artifact, the cavern erupted with a deafening crack. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the walls seemed to flex, as though the mine itself was alive, fighting to hold its shape. Dust and debris rained down like a storm. The artifact split open with a sickening sound, spilling darkness thick, choking blackness that surged toward Eli with terrifying speed. It moved like liquid shadow, tendrils reaching for him, dragging him into its depths. "No!" Lenora cried, her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to reach him, but the darkness moved too quickly. Before she could get close, Eli was engulfed, his screams sharp, roar with terror echoed through the cavern, but they were drowned by the rush of shadow. His eyes, wide and full of fear, rolled back in his skull. His body convulsed once, then fell still, his face frozen in terror, before he was swallowed completely. The shadows shifted toward Lenora and Sully, their tendrils twisting like the arms of a monstrous entity, reaching to drag them into the void. Sully stepped forward, drawing his weapon, but he was futile. The shadows seemed to laugh an eerie sound, like wind howling through a hollow tree. There was no stop. "We need to move, now," Sully shouted, dragging Lenora toward the exit. The mine seemed to collapse around them, the walls groaning and cracking as though it were tearing apart from within. "I'm not leaving you," Lenora cried, pulling against Sully's grip. Sully's eyes softened, but only for a moment. He forced her forward, his hand gripping her wrist like iron. "You don't have a choice," he yelled. "You have to survive." With one final push, he sent her stumbling toward the narrow opening in the distance. The shadows were closing in with terrifying speed. Sully turned back for one last look at Lenora. "Run, Lenora," he shouted. Lenora burst into the open air, gasping for breath, but the shadows clung to the edges of her vision. They whispered no, screamed as Sully's voice joined them, distorted and frantic. He had given her a chance to escape, but now he was lost to the void, consumed by the very darkness he had tried to hold back. The whispers of the abyss would never let him go. Weeks later, Lenora sat in her dimly lit apartment, her fingers tracing the rim of a half-empty coffee cup, staring blankly at the wall. The artifact was destroyed, but its memory lingered, a shadow over her thought. She'd buried her grief under layers of rationalization, but at night her dreams were haunted by Sully's voice, Ivy's screams, and the hollow laughter of shadows that had no mouths. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt oppressive. The mirrors caught glimpses of movements that weren't there, and the shadows stretched too far, lingered too long. She kept the lights on at all hours, but still the darkness found ways to creep in. Her journal, once filled with notes and sketches, now overflowed with incoherent scribbles. Shapes of the artifact, fragments of whispers she couldn't escape. She pressed her hands to her temples, trying to block out the murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Were they real, or had horrors of Evershade taken root in her mind, growing like weeds? The therapists called it survivor's guilt, but she knew the truth. The Hollow Ones were still out there, and they were calling her name. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the veil of dark whispers. If you dare to uncover more secrets and tales from beyond the shadows, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more eerie adventures. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.